Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, September 17th, and we got some games to talk about. We have a great Week 4 slate coming up. A couple of teams on byes, but we have three ranked matchups we're going to talk about in the first slate. Obviously, Texas Tech goes on the road to Utah for maybe the play-in game for the Big 12 championship very, very early, but a huge game between the two favorites in that conference. You got Auburn-Oklahoma, two teams that, if they win this weekend, they are looking at the CFP as a very real possibility. I think Oklahoma's already doing that a little bit, but Auburn absolutely would get a little bit of a kickstart with a massive win on the road. And then Illinois, Indiana, a huge one in the Big 10 that, again, very well could be the fourth team that makes the CFP from the Big 10, could come from that game, no doubt about it. Going to the second segment, we got Michigan-Nebraska this upcoming weekend. That is another one that absolutely could be the other team that makes it from the Big 12 or the Big 10 into the CFP. There are a lot of really, really good opportunities in that game, and whoever wins it firmly in the mix for maybe making a little bit of a run this year. Tulane Ole Miss, a very interesting game that we'll talk about. We got Florida Miami, South Carolina Missouri in that second segment. Then we'll do a little bit of a whip around to all the other games we want to talk about today. And then my best bets to finish things off. Had a winning record last week, so kind of turning things around there. So hopefully we'll be able to get that going and continue our winning ways into Week 4. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing because we got three games this weekend like we did last weekend. We have one in every single window. Hopefully they'll deliver even close to the level that the ones last week did, because that would be really, really good football. No two ways about it. But we'll start at the noon slate, and then we'll work our way through the day. But it gets started with a bang. We have number 17 Texas Tech going on the road to number 16 Utah. Utah favored by a field goal and a hook in this one. 58.5 is the over-under. This one's going to be really fun. I think a lot of people circle these two teams, including myself, as the favorites in this conference right now, and whoever wins it is firmly the guy that everyone is trying to beat going forward, and firmly the team that I would absolutely pick in the CFP coming out of the Big 12. This is going to be a really, really fun game. Texas Tech comes in as the number 2 scoring offense in the country, obviously has not faced the test that Utah will be this weekend. Utah coming off a game where they didn't play their best football, at least early in that matchup, but found their footing late and won that pretty comfortably. This one's going to be really fun. It's going to be an absolute battle in the trenches, and we'll get to that here in a second, but this is an absolute heavyweight fight in the Big 12. I think these are the two teams that you were absolutely circling coming into the year, and they've held up every end of the bargain thus far. The matchup to watch in this game is going to be Mac Leftwich against Morgan Scalley. These two guys are about as good as it gets in the Big 12 when you talk about coordinators and play callers. These guys know exactly what they're doing. Obviously, Morgan Scalley has Kyle Whittingham to help him out in different moments, and he absolutely is very hands-on with that defense. Mac Leftwich came in from Texas State this past offseason. Very talented offensive mind, and the guy that really fits with Barry Morton very obviously early on in this season. He's playing great football. It's going to be an awesome matchup. And I think you have two quarterbacks that are very experienced, very smart. Even Devin Dampier, coming in from New Mexico, came in with his offensive coordinator. So it's not like he's going over into a new system. He came in also with his best receiver from New Mexico, and he's the leading receiver for Utah right now. So everything is working the way that Utah wants it to. I think both these sides of the ball are going to have really, really tough times getting a groove at least early in this football game, but Mac Leftwich against Morgan Scalley might just be the one that decides it. You know, can Texas Tech create the explosives they create through 2 weeks, and can Utah do the exact same thing on the other side, or is this defense just a little bit too much for a Texas Tech team that hasn't quite gotten the big-time test yet? Some keys to watch. The trench battle is going to be absolutely incredible. If you want to see the NFL players on the field, frankly, there's going to be multiple of them all over the field, but the lines of scrimmage are going to be where you want to watch. I think particularly the Texas Tech defensive line against the Utah offensive line. It's going to be special. Utah has two at least first round, maybe top 15 picks at offensive tackle. When you talk about Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, two incredibly talented guys. And then Texas Tech reworked defensive line looks terrifying. You got Lee Hunter, Romello Heights, Skylar Gill-Howard, and a ton of other guys that are playing really, really good football for that team. And I think they're going to be incredible in this game. I think Utah's offensive line is absolutely incredible. So it's going to be an absolute heavyweight battle up front, and whoever wins it could very well win this game, particularly the Utah offensive line and the Texas Tech defensive line. But the Utah defensive line is nothing, no slouch by any means, and that will be a very fun fight against the Texas Tech offensive line. But the other part of this is which team can create explosives, particularly Texas Tech in some respects. They love to push the ball downfield. They have Coy Egan. They have a number of guys on the outside that can make some big-time plays, and Baron Morton's playing at a ridiculously high level. So Texas Tech, they had 5 30-yard plus passes against Kent State, 3 against Oregon State last week. They're going to push the ball downfield, point blank period. But Teo Johnson, Jackson Beanie, and a number of other guys on the back end for Utah can make life really, really tough for Coy Egan and company. So I think that's going to be really fun. And then Devin Dampier can make all types of plays. With his arms, with his legs, he is going to make you hurt at some point. How much can you hold up against that group is going to be a huge question for a Texas Tech defense that is going to be really good, especially if that pass rush can get going. Then you have a really interesting conversation, but still the biggest challenge they faced to date by a pretty comfortable margin. Kind of the same thing for Utah, to be totally fair, but at least they get that one at home. And that's kind of my final idea is Rice Eccles is going to be a factor in this game. It is a loud environment. I don't care that it's going to be 10 a.m. They're pretty used to that treatment around that part of the country, so I think they're going to be ready to roll. I think those fans are going to be a factor in this game. Baron Morton, very experienced, very smart, very good football player. This is going to be a really tough atmosphere. There's no doubt about that. Can he handle that, and can the guys around him handle that is about as big of a point in this game as just about anyone else. And I think this one's going to be special. I think it's going to show that these are probably the 2 best teams in the conference. This could very well be a look-ahead spot for the Big 12 championship where we get to see it once and then we get to see it again later in the season. But I'm going to take Utah at home. I'm going to take Utah 31-27. I tend to trust their offense and defense a little bit more as a unit going into this game than I do for Texas Tech. Now, the margins are relatively thin, but Texas Tech continues to enter relatively new guys into the mix, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I think the Utah offensive line does enough against this really talented front for Texas Tech, and they're able to get a big-time win at home, kind of assert themselves as the top team in the conference, and we'll see how it develops from there. I think these are 2 very, very good football teams. I think they very well could end up meeting in Arlington at the end of the year, but I'll take Utah this time around. Them being at home and having a little bit more trust in that, especially that back end, I'll roll with Utah for the time being. Moving to 3:30 and to the SEC, Auburn goes on the road to Oklahoma, number 22 against number 11. Oklahoma favored by 6.5 points, over under at 48.5. This one's going to be really, really fun. Hugh Freeze against Brent Venables, a very interesting matchup, and really a matchup that, frankly, coming into this game, could have been one where they both really needed it in a lot of different ways. You know, what if Oklahoma loses to Michigan? What if Auburn lost to Baylor earlier in the year? Then you got 2-2-1 teams walking into this game, and they're both thinking, we got to be able to win this one. If they were falling to 500 after this one, I think there would be an awkward conversation to be had about one of these coaches. They're both walking in undefeated, so there's no problem there. They're really rolling right now, and Oklahoma has kind of become the talk of the town in college football, particularly John Mateer taking over the reins, has done a downright incredible job. Probably been one of the best, if not the best quarterback in the SEC thus far, and he wants to continue to assert himself. And then on the other side, it's the guy coming back home. Jackson Arnold takes Auburn into Norman for the first time as not an Oklahoma Sooner. It is going to be a very interesting atmosphere. I don't know exactly how the fans feel about him. Frankly, I don't think they should hate him a ton because there was a lot wrong with that offense that was not named Jackson Arnold, but at the end of the day, it is going to be a very interesting atmosphere, and have to imagine there's going to be some fans that take a little bit of exception for him coming back home, but it'll be really, really fun. I think these are 2 teams that, if they win it, they're probably looking at the CFP as a very real possibility this year. But let's get into the matchup to watch. It's always the matchup to watch whenever Hugh Freeze is going up against a defensive coach. Can Hugh Freeze handle Brent Venables? Can Brent Venables make Hugh Freeze's offense a little bit stagnant? That's the big-time question in this matchup because Jackson Arnold, as good as he's been with his legs, they haven't asked him to do a ton with his arm. And I think that's relatively surprising because you had 2 games where you could kind of play around with things. Now, South Alabama gave you a little bit of a worry late in that football game, but at the end of the day, you probably should have been able to do more in the past game through the first 3 weeks, and now you walk into a game where you're going to need it. I absolutely promise you that. You're not going to run Jackson Arnold 25 times in this game and be able to leave with a win. I can promise you that. So you're going to have to find a way to get a little bit more creative on the outside. Now, the good news for you that Michigan did not have, you have elite wide receivers. You maybe have one of the top 5 or 3 wide receiver groups in the entire country. You got to find a way to get them involved and get them involved relatively early, because I don't think it's going to get easier to get them involved throughout this football game. So it's going to be a really fun matchup between these two. I think they're both really talented in what they do. I'm a little bit more questionable about Hugh Freeze going into this football game, and have been for a while, but at the end of the day, it is going to be a great matchup, and whoever wins it is probably winning this football game. But some keys to the game: Jackson Arnold. Is this a revenge game for him? How does he view this one? I don't really know. I do think the ending over there was tumultuous and not the way that either of them wanted that thing to end. I don't know how much outright bad blood there is. I think everyone was better off going different directions. That doesn't change that he wants to show them something. That doesn't change he wants to show that he was not remotely the problem with that offense a year ago, and he is a very, very good football player still. I tend to believe that. We'll see if he can really put it on a show this upcoming weekend, and can he use his legs to the level that he really wants to, because if he can, he's going to have to make throws that he hasn't had to make this year, and he just didn't make a year ago. So it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. Does he rise to the challenge? Does he get a little bit intimidated by his former home crowd getting after him just a little bit early in this football game? And then which offensive line can hold up? Both these defensive lines are absolutely nasty, particularly Oklahoma, but when you have Keldrick Falk on a group, you're going to have a really good chance of doing something pretty special any given week. So it is going to be a fight for both these groups. The Auburn offensive line is much more known than the Oklahoma group. They're getting much better, the Oklahoma group is, especially with Michael Fasusi and a lot of those guys coming back and being healthy. That is absolutely huge for this football team, and I think they will get better throughout the year. This is going to be a big challenge. There's no doubt about that. They have dudes across that line for Auburn that are going to play in the NFL someday for quite some time. So how can you hold up against that group? Can you give John Mateer time? They did a great job against Michigan in a number of different ways. Not only the offensive line giving John Mateer a little bit more time, but Ben Arbuckle getting John Mateer out of the pocket, making sure it wasn't as big of a worry for the defensive line to get after him. I think that's probably what they're going to have to do in this game, at least to a certain extent, maybe not to the aggressive extent they had to against Michigan. And then finally, the quarterback run game. I think this is a given. Whenever you watch John Mateer in these big-time football games, he is going to use his legs. Same thing for Jackson Arnold, more by design with Jackson Arnold, but at the end of the day, they're going to need John Mateer in this football game. I think both these teams, if they don't get the quarterback run game going, they're probably not getting the run game going too much. That's been the big kind of thing plaguing both these football teams. Oklahoma maybe, I don't want to say Oklahoma more, but at the end of the day, both these teams are going to need their quarterback to make some big-time plays. Both these defenses are going to play good football. There's no doubt about that. Can Oklahoma find the openings with John Mateer, and do they need to find as many openings as Auburn does with Jackson Arnold's legs? Because that could be the great equalizer as well. Does Auburn need Jackson Arnold's legs a little bit more than Oklahoma does because they can't get the pass game going? Or maybe Oklahoma needs John Mateer to put on a show with his legs. So I think it's going to be a really fun matchup. I think these two teams are really going to get after each other. At the end of the day, whenever I picture this game going, I see Jackson Arnold making one big-time mistake late in this football game, and Oklahoma gets a big-time win. I think Brent Venables is a nightmare to deal with, and I don't think Jackson Arnold in this passing game is ready to do it, at least as of yet. I do think they'll get better throughout the year, but I think this is a big ask for a young quarterback that is still getting comfortable with his wide receivers to go into place and essentially win a football game for you, especially if he can't use his legs to that degree. I'll take Oklahoma to win this one 27-20. I think they look pretty good doing it, if I'm being honest, and the Oklahoma train continues to roll on to a possible CFP berth. Number 9, Illinois on the road at number 19, Indiana. Indiana actually favored by 5.5 in this football game, over under at 52.5. This one's going to be a night game in Bloomington. It's going to be a ton of fun. These two teams, I think if you win this one, you're firmly looking at the CFP as a real possibility. I know Indiana already is kind of expecting that of this season, given what they did last season. Totally understandable. Illinois came into this season as a top 12 team, has stayed there since. So they're firmly in a position where they're already thinking about it. I think they both understand this is the kickstart game. This is the game that really gets you over the hump, that gets you in a position to make a CFP run. And it's two quarterbacks that are really interesting to me. You have Luke Altmaier going into, I believe, his third season up there in Illinois, has played some really good football, played very consistently. And then Fernando Mendoza on the other side that might be one of the more talented quarterbacks in the entire country, a guy that's getting looked at as a future NFL prospect, probably after next year if I had to imagine. But this is going to be a really fun battle, and it's two teams that are really kind of getting their season fully underway. Now, Illinois did play Duke on the road, got a really comfortable, really good win, but at the end of the day, this is going to be a kick up in talent, a kick up in competition. There's no doubt about that. So it's going to be a really fun matchup. I think these two coaches have all the talent in the world, and I think they're two guys that are going to put their team in really good positions. Which team can execute at a higher level is going to be the big question here. And the matchup to watch in my mind is the Illinois wide receivers against the Indiana DBs. I think when you talk about the Illinois wide receivers, I was relatively worried coming in. You lose Pat Bryant from a year ago. You lose Zachary Franklin from a year ago. Hank Beaty's playing really good football right now. Hudson Clement is starting to really play good football, and I do think both those guys has all the ability in the world to be a top receiver in the Big Ten and for Illinois and get them in a position to possibly make the CFP. The problem is you have really good players on the other side of the football. D'Angelo Pons, one of the better cornerbacks you're going to find in the entire country. Lewis Moore playing at a ridiculously high level. Devon Boykin, the same exact thing. Very consistent piece in that back end. It is going to be a really fun battle. Luke Altmaier is going to have to throw into tight windows. He's going to have to make big time plays with his arm because the windows are going to be tight. There's no doubt about that. These receivers are going to be able to get open at times, but D'Angelo Pons is going to be right behind him, and you're going to have to make a good throw. So it's going to be a really, really fun matchup, and I think it's going to go back and forth between which team can just find those small openings. I don't think this game's going to be decided by a ton. I think you're going to have to find the really small openings throughout this one to get a big-time win. Can Luke Altmaier do it? Can Fernando Mendoza do it on the other side? And that's kind of one of my big-time keys to the game. This is Fernando Mendoza's big-time test. This is his first big-time test as the Indiana quarterback, and it's a lot. There's no doubt about that. You're playing a night game in Bloomington against a top 10 team. It is going to be a lot of pressure on him, and the Illinois defense really proved themselves against Duke. It wasn't a perfect game throughout a lot of that, but the defense got after him. Gabe Jackas is an absolute nightmare to deal with. They have a number of really good players on the back end of that defense that can make play after play, and he's going to have to be careful. He's going to have to play really consistent, really clean football and not give Illinois the openings to kind of run away with this one the way that they were able to against Duke. And then the run game battle is really interesting to me. Both these teams want to run the ball. That is who they are. Indiana has 3 different leading rushers through the first 3 games, all of which have over 200 yards on the season. Fernando Mendoza is a factor with his legs as well. Then you got Illinois, Caden Fagan, very talented guy. Khalil Valentine, another really good player. Aiden Malafry. It's a very, very good group on both sides of the football when you talk about the run game. And if either of these quarterbacks don't get a run game to help them out, it's probably going to be a tough day sledding. There's no doubt about that. It's probably going to be a really, really long afternoon, and you're going to have to find a way to scrape by points. They're going to have to get the run game going early in this one. Whichever team can do that more effectively is in a really good position moving forward. Obviously, Indiana's been able to run the ball very effectively against lesser talent. Illinois has been able to run the ball fairly effectively against Duke and a couple of relative layups. So whichever one of these teams can get that going early is probably going to win this football game. And then, as we talked off the top, this is a CFP kickstart. This is a game that can get you in a position to make a run towards a CFP. For Illinois, you still get USC, Washington, and Ohio State later, so you still have work to do. For Indiana, it's Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State. But the reality is, you get to 10-2, you're in a really good position going forward. They would be 4-0 if one of them, whichever one wins this game, and they'd be in really good position, particularly Illinois only getting Ohio State while Indiana gets Oregon and Penn State. But at the end of the day, both these teams are in firm position to make a little bit of a run. Indiana gets a big one against Iowa next week, so it's going to be really, really interesting to watch all of that unfold, and it's going to be awesome to watch what these two teams can do. I'm going to pick Indiana to win it. I don't really have a great reason. I think these two teams are relatively even in my mind. I think Fernando Mendoza has a little bit of a coming out party. I think he makes one big-time play or a couple big-time plays in this football game and kind of takes the world by storm just a little bit. We'll have to see what Indiana does the rest of the season, but I'll take the Hoosiers to get a big-time win at home. One of the bigger wins under Curt Cignetti. Obviously, the Michigan win last year was huge, but this might be a little bit bigger than that one. A huge one at home at night in Bloomington. I'll take the Hoosiers to win this football game. But those 3 games are going to be incredible. We can only hope they deliver the way Clemson, Georgia Tech, Georgia, Tennessee, and then Texas A&M, Notre Dame did last week. We'll just have to wait for those. They're going to be incredible matchups, and we will absolutely talk about them a little bit more on Friday and then break them down on Monday when they unfold. But let's take a little bit of a break. When we come back, we got a Week 3 picks. We got Michigan, Nebraska, Tulane, Ole Miss. We got Florida, Miami, South Carolina, Missouri, all coming right after this, so stick with us.